Under the color of a dying sun, a young woman walked alone through the dust of the western road. Her name was Evelyn Greyfeather, 20 years old, the last breath of a family the earth had already claimed. Her mother and father had passed 2 winters before, taken by fever and frost. Her elder brother, Samuel Greyfeather, 30, had drowned in the river only a week ago, the water swallowing his cry and her heart in the same cold instant. Now she carried his poncho over her shoulders, rough, woolen, and smelling faintly of smoke and sage, and kept walking. Each step was a promise that grief would not have her too. But she was tired, so very tired. The horizon shimmered like a mirage, and far off, a curl of smoke rose, thin and gray, from what looked like a ranch. She paused, clutching the poncho tighter. Was it safety, or the next place her hope would die? The wind shifted, carrying the scent of horses and rain that hadn't yet fallen. Evelyn followed it, her feet dragging through the dust until she stood before a wooden arch bearing the words Iron Mesa Ranch. The boards groaned as if remembering all who had come before, wanderers, workers, dreamers, the lost. She hesitated at the gate, breath trembling, then pushed it open. A tall man stood near the corral, mending a broken fence post. His shadow fell long in the evening light. Clayton Clay Hollister, 30, looked like the land itself, broad, steady, and scarred in quiet ways. His face was tanned and weathered, his eyes the gray of old iron. Evelyn's voice caught in her throat, dry from days of silence. "I lost my family," she said softly. "Please, give me a job at your ranch." Clay turned, the hammer in his hand stilling mid-swing. For a long moment, he said nothing. The desert wind spoke instead, fluttering the fringe of Evelyn's poncho. Something in her eyes, some stubborn flicker of life, held him. He had seen eyes like that once before, in his mother's face as she lay dying, refusing to let go until he promised to live well. "There's little work left here," he said finally, "and less comfort." "I'll take what's left," she replied. The answer was too honest to refuse. He nodded once, gesturing toward the barn. "You can sleep in there. We'll see how you do come morning." Evelyn bowed her head, whispering a thank you to the dust. The barn was half empty, smelling of hay and rain-worn wood. She curled up in a corner that night, the poncho around her, her brother's memory breathing beside her. Outside, the ranch creaked and sighed under a restless sky. In the days that followed, silence became her language. She rose before dawn, fetching water, feeding horses, mending saddles. Her hands learned the rhythm of survival again. Clay watched from a distance, curious, cautious. He had hired her out of pity, maybe, but pity turned into something else when he saw how the wild horses calmed under her touch. She spoke to them in whispers, soft syllables that seemed older than English, and the restless creatures bent their necks as if listening to prayer. At night, she sang by the corral, low songs of mourning carried by the wind. Clay would stop what he was doing and listen from his porch, feeling something unnamed stir inside him. He did not know whether it was grief remembering itself or hope waking for the first time in years. Then came the storm. It arrived without warning, lightning tearing the sky in half, thunder shaking the ground. The horses screamed in panic, breaking from their stalls, hooves hammering against the earth. Clay rushed from the house, rain pelting his hat, shouting for the hands. Evelyn was already there, barefoot in the mud, calling the horses back in her native tongue. Her voice, though small, cut through the chaos like a bell. One by one, the horses obeyed, circling her trembling figure. Clay ran to help, slipping, cursing, but when lightning split the sky again, he saw her face. Hair plastered to her skin, eyes bright with command and terror, and something in him stilled. She wasn't the girl he'd taken in out of charity. She was wildfire disguised as a whisper. When the storm broke, they stood side by side in the pouring rain, breathing hard. He reached for her arm, his hand hovering inches from her skin, but he stopped himself. The air between them crackled with something more dangerous than thunder. She looked up at him once, then turned away, walking back to the barn. The days after felt quieter, but heavier too. The ranch hands had started to talk. "Bad luck," some said. "You let a native girl work the ranch, strange things happen." Clay pretended not to hear. Evelyn didn't have to pretend. She had lived long enough under the world's judgment to recognize its weight. She carried it the way she carried her grief, without complaint. Still, words have a way of finding their mark. One evening, she lingered at the stable long after the chores were done, rubbing the same saddle over and over, tears slipping down her cheeks. Clay saw her through the open door, his heart catching in his throat. That night, he found a note slipped under his door. "Fire her, or we walk." He sat on the edge of his bed, the paper trembling in his hand. The walls of the house seemed to close in around him, the same walls his father had built, the same ranch that had taken everything from him but his pride. Pride, he thought bitterly, what a lonely inheritance. When he stepped outside, the moon was high, the land silver and still. Evelyn stood by the corral, hair loose, her face turned toward the horizon. He walked up quietly, but she spoke before he could. "If my being here brings you trouble," she said, "I'll go." Her voice carried no bitterness, only weary grace. The wind whispered between them, carrying the scent of sagebrush and rain that hadn't yet come. Clay looked at her, at the way moonlight rested on her shoulders, at the strength in her stillness. "You stay," he said finally, his voice rough as gravel. Then, gently, he took off his hat and set it on the post beside her. A small gesture, but one that said more than words ever could. After that night, something shifted. They worked together in quiet rhythm. He fixed fences while she carried feed. He showed her how to ride a stallion no one else could tame. She mended his torn shirts with neat, careful stitches. They rarely spoke of the past, but now and then, their eyes met and lingered. When she smiled, rare, fleeting, it changed the air around them. One morning, he found a single wildflower laid across his saddle. No note, no words, just the bloom and the quiet warmth it left behind. He didn't ask who placed it there. Some things didn't need naming. Then, one night, fire returned to Iron Mesa. It began with a shattered lantern, the careless act of a drunken ranch hand. Flames leapt from the hay, greedy and bright, devouring the dark. Evelyn woke to the crack of timber and the scream of horses. Without thinking, she ran barefoot into the barn, her lungs filling with smoke. Clay woke moments later, the smell of fire thick in the air, and sprinted after her. "Evelyn!" he shouted, voice breaking. Inside, the heat was unbearable. Sparks rained like stars as beams groaned and fell. She was there, trying to free a trapped mare, coughing, refusing to leave. He fought his way through the smoke, grabbed her wrist, and pulled her toward the door. The ceiling split behind them, the world roaring in flame. For a terrible second, he thought he had lost her. Then her hand found his, small, trembling, alive. They stumbled out into the night together as the barn collapsed in a storm of cinders. Dawn came slow, gray, and quiet. The ranch was a skeleton of ash, but the horses lived, and so did they. Clay looked at Evelyn, her face streaked with soot, eyes red from smoke and tears. Without ceremony, without hesitation, he said, "Marry me." She blinked, as if unsure she'd heard right. But then she saw his eyes. Not pity, not obligation, but something steady, like a river that finally found its course. She nodded once. Their wedding was small, at sunrise. The mesa burned gold beneath the light, the air soft with dust and forgiveness. Clay wore Samuel's silver bracelet on his wrist. Evelyn carried a white feather in her hair. There was no preacher, only the wind and the promise spoken between two people who had lost everything but the will to love again. They built the ranch back together. The fields bloomed, the fences rose stronger. Laughter returned, first in quiet snatches, then like music. Years later, when Clay sat on the porch with their children running across the yard, he often found himself remembering that first day, the dust road, the girl with the tired eyes, the plea that had changed his life. He would tell the story softly, his voice like the low hum of a remembered prayer. She came to me with nothing but grief in her hands, he'd say, and left this land blooming. The wind would carry her song then, a tune half sorrow, half sunlight, drifting over the mesas until it became part of the land itself. And if you ever rode past Iron Mesa at dusk, you might hear it too, faint and haunting, like a promise kept. Because sometimes mercy is the only seed worth planting. And sometimes love grows quietly, unseen, until one morning you look up and find it has filled the whole horizon. And perhaps if you listen closely enough, you'll wonder, as Clay once did, when your own heart last found home.